We're joined once again by Steve Baker, investigative journalist and Blaze media correspondent. He has a new piece out on the Blaze today. Check it out. Capitol Police were sacrificial pawns on January 6th. They didn't give an S about what had happened. I'll tweet out a link to that shortly. Steve, thanks so much for coming on. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Stu.
Yeah, I mean, this is incredible. This kind of relates to your documentary you're working on with Harry Dunn, right?
Right.
Yeah. Walk us through the story.
Well, this story is something I actually wrote over a year ago, but that was back before I was with the Blaze, and it was it was on my blog. It was a series I did about the Capitol Police. It was actually what kind of brought me to the attention of our editor-in-chief, Matt Peterson, here at the Blaze, as I was working on developing that. And this was, a 2-year process for me putting this together, interviewing Capitol Police officers. We're talking about both off the record and on the record. There were some whistleblowers that came out, which we quote in the article, and then of course some guys behind the scene that are still there, and they can't talk openly because the Capitol Police have them under non-disclosure agreements, that sort of thing. So it's been a lot of work to put this together, but the bottom line is almost to a man and a woman, those who were the frontline officers there on January 6th believe that they were set up. And if you ask me the follow-up that question, who set them up?
Yeah.
I think I know, but that's part of what the ongoing investigations are looking at, is to connect the final remaining dots.
Okay. Well, until we get there, describe what you mean by being set up. How were they set up?
Well, the first and the most obvious thing, and this has even been discussed widely, even within mainstream press articles and coverage, is that the Capitol Police, they were woefully undermanned that day. Now the question is was that a product of just the COVID regime that they were still under at that time?
Sure.
Because we're talking about, on January 6th, they had roughly 2,000 uniformed officers that they could have called upon. But for instance, the Capitol Police Lieutenant Tarek Johnson, who famously evacuated the Senate and the House without permission from command, and got in trouble for that, he told me himself that he had less than 200 officers available to him that day, and he was in charge of internal security that day of the Capitol.
10%.
Yes,
10% of what they could have had.
And in my very first article that I wrote, a week after January 6th, that's exactly what I identified with my own eyes. I said that I estimated that there was 200 or less actual Capitol Police officers there before they were reinforced by Metropolitan Police and other state police and other law enforcement agencies that arrived throughout the day.
That makes no sense, especially because of what we now know from this IG report that came out recently, that, Donald Trump wanted more people there. He, in the days leading up to January 6th, seemed to sense some sort of danger. And the way he phrased it, I don't know if you know this quote off the top of your head, but the way he phrased it, it was like, it could have been danger to the building. It could have been danger to the protesters themselves from other protesters. He didn't know what it was, but he just wanted it to be locked down.
He wanted what he said, I want everyone to be safe. He actually used the word safe. I actually saw one critic say, he never even says the word safe. And I'm like, what? What do you mean he doesn't use the word safe? We all use the word safe.
Right.
But they said
and it was the source of this was an opponent of his, like someone who hates Donald Trump, Mark Milley.
That's right. Milley, and who we thought was a friendly of Trump's, was his appointed acting Secretary of Defense at the time, Chris Miller. I mean, he had just been appointed 2 months before the conclusion of the administration to kind of see it the rest of the way out.
Right.
But he, behind the scenes, under oath transcripted interviews with the committee, he actually was very critical and actually said that there was no way that under his watch he was going to allow the president to have command or have control over military forces that day. He actually said that.
So Trump, we know Trump asked for this, for forces to be there to keep people safe. And we know he didn't get them. So, where does that fall down? Is it Miller's fault? Where does the...
I am convinced through everyone that we've spoken to, and we have a very high-ranking Pentagon official who came on the record with the Blaze. That's former Assistant Secretary of the Army, Casey Wardynski. He was actually on the teleconference call on January 6th with the Pentagon generals, 2 3-star generals, 1 4-star general, as well as the D.C. National Guard commanders. And it was on that call that the Pentagon generals, under the command of Mark Milley, said, no, we don't like the optics of the National Guard being up there. This was an hour after the assaults had began. I mean, the battle was fully engaged, and they said, no, we don't like the optics. That's where that phrase came from.
That doesn't make any sense to me. Now, you've been looking into all of this from the beginning, going through, I mean, I've talked to you zillions, if that's a word, zillions of hours of footage.
Yeah.
And one of the things you've been working on is this documentary. It's a 3-part documentary on Harry Dunn. Remind people who Harry Dunn is again.
Yeah, Harry Dunn is singularly the most famous police officer to ever come out of the Capitol Police. He rose to fame anonymously at first because he gave an anonymous interview to BuzzFeed in the just 2 or 3 days following the Capitol, in which he claimed that he had been assaulted by the N-word on numerous occasions throughout the day. And once he was publicly outed, and of course, by the way, he was in violation of Capitol Police policy to be able to be giving a politically charged interview in the first place.
Right.
Once he was outed as being the one who gave that BuzzFeed interview, then that story began to develop and embellish, and it became a situation where he claimed at one point that 20, 30, 40, I'm quoting him, as many as 50 people were chanting the N-word at him.
Now, that would be something that other people would notice.
Well, it was not only something that other people would notice, he gave us the exact location and the time when it happened, which of course gives us the opportunity to go look at CCTV and prove that it did not happen, as well as all of the other open source video that's come out in the trials now through trial discoveries that have the audio on it from people's cell phone cameras.
Right.
And so it's something that did not take place. Now, look, was the N-word used that day? Absolutely. I mean, there were people carrying Confederate flags, okay? Not many.
Not many, but there was a few.
But there were. The most famous one that was the guy that carried it through the rotunda, of course, he was from Delaware.
It's a strange thing to advocate, is the Confederacy when you're in Delaware.
Yeah, so, but these...
Joe Biden's home state, by the way.
Right. That's why I brought it up. But it's nevertheless... you can't have hundreds of thousands of people and not have some racists in the crowd.
There's always going to be a terrible person somewhere saying something. But like, that's not, that doesn't support 50 people chanting it. There's no evidence of that.
None whatsoever. And then all of the other versions of the story have been negated by the video evidence as well. In Harry Dunn's case, though, he rose to fame on the basis of the N-word story, and then he becomes a media darling because that really comports with their preferred narrative about what happened that day, that everybody was racist, everybody was white supremacist, et cetera, et cetera. And then he became a darling with the January 6th Select Committee, which he testified under oath. Well, now we know by the video evidence that most of what he said to that committee was not factual. Then he testified in the trials. We have the trial transcripts. I was there. And in addition to not only him changing his story between his FBI interviews to what he said in the trial transcripts, to now we have his book. And then Congress granted me hundreds of hours of access to the Capitol CCTV. I don't have any personal animosity towards former Officer Harry Dunn, except to the extent that he was allowed to. In fact, I believe that his perjury was suborned by the Department of Justice. Yes, I just said that. And he was suborned to change his story about the Oath Keepers, the encounter he had with them that day. And that's what got me focused on him to begin with, was going to the story about the Oath Keepers. And then as I expanded my video viewing of him earlier in the morning and then later into the afternoon and the evening, it turns out that almost nothing he said about that day is correct.
Yeah, if I remember right, not only there's no evidence of this chanting of N-words and this assault he's talking about, but also he wasn't even in the same room. He wasn't even there at the time.
That's correct. Not even there. But everything about his day is the way it is. Just his arrival in the morning, he claims that he was in he spends 6 pages in his book describing this morning roll call briefing, gave us the exact location in the Capitol where this briefing happened. Just so happens there's 2 cameras in that room. Nobody was ever in that room all day.
I mean, why would you lie about that? That doesn't make any sense.
And then we have the testimony from the Capitol Police officers that were also frontline officers, or what they call their first responders unit. We didn't have a roll call briefing that morning. We were still under COVID, regime.
So wild. All right, we got 1 minute left. Is this having any effect? I mean, and you see like Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger and all these people making this argument that January 6th is the reason you should vote against Donald Trump. Is this having any effect in the election?
This is why this story is important. 2 reasons. Number one, it shows the tremendous amount of disinformation, purposeful and lies that were given to us, the American public, from that committee that you just referred to, the House January 6th Select Committee. It also shows us the ineptitude of GOP and their committees, because those officers who I've interviewed, who have perjured themselves in trial, who have proven it absolutely, no doubt about it, we've got them dead to rights. Why hasn't the Judiciary Committee called them to testify under oath and get this out before the American people? Because they put people in prison for decades as a result of those lies.
You're asking a question. Do you know the answer to it?
I think I do. I've done a story on it.
All right, we're going to get to that maybe next time when you're on. We're out of time for today. Steve Baker, be sure to check out his new piece on The Blaze. It's Capitol Police were sacrificial pawns on January 6th. They didn't give an S about what happened. I will tweet out a link to that shortly here. Steve, thanks so much for coming on the program.
Thanks,
Appreciate
Steve.
it.